Welcome back to the Choosing Known podcast. I'm Laura Catherine Etheridge, and I am happy to be back and spend more time with each of you today. And hope you've had a really, really nice week this last week. So, we're going to pick up part two this week on what we began on last week with the idea of our identity and our purpose. And those are, of course, our gigantic topics. And so we are touching on both of them in a part one, part two, and there's of course so much more that could be said, but we're gonna touch on it part one, part two, and then we'll touch on this more at a future date. But I wanna make sure, as promised, to dive into the second part of this. So last time, we talked a whole lot about identity, and we kind of started with our fun idea of a favorite things party. And I know I talked some about some of my favorite things, my Garden of Life protein powder and this fun, very compact, all of what you need in a very practical screwdriver around the house because it has both ends inside of it here for us, and just as a cool little gadget. So I know we spent time last time jumping into that and talking about when we know the identity of something, what it is, then we are much better equipped to then understand what it's for. What is it used for? And if I know, okay, it's a screwdriver, it drives screws, puts them in, pulls them out, then based on knowing what it is, I know what it's used for. And so we also talked about how if we know who we are, what our identity is, who we are, who we're created to be, that takes us a very long way down the road with God in understanding what was I created for? What is my purpose and what was I created for? And so today we want to talk more about that and how we go about finding that. So I know also last week I encouraged you, begin to track that more. When we talked about the idea of the soul, and the soul is that part of us that isn't changing. It was created by God, and we want to notice when we're feeling more fulfilled. We kind of talked about the idea of a gas gauge. And then when we're feeling less fulfilled and how we feel more empty and drained. And so I'm hoping that you have taken some time to consider that, and even just to pick up on some of that for yourself over the last week, and maybe make some notes about that and begin to track it. Because it's so worth it. It takes work. Yes, it takes energy. Yes, but if we could really know who we are and who we're meant to be, then we are going to be able to figure out, with God's help, what it will mean for us to have abundant life. We're gonna get there when we know, what does that mean for me to have abundant life. So hopefully you're doing some of that. I was thinking a little bit after the episode last week about the idea of something that years ago I used to think was really kind of cheesy, but now I've come to find it to be really a valuable tool, and that's the idea of a vision board. So if this idea is intriguing to you of identity and purpose and what's God called me to, and you're logging some of that, tracking it, you might like knowing. If you don't, about the idea of a vision board, you can go online and type that in, and it's going to show you some different things. But the concept is really quite simple. What is the saying? It's simple, but it's not easy. And the concept is very simple, but it's not easy in the sense of, the more we understand who I am and what I'm meant to be, then sometimes finding pictures or images that really encapsulate that for us, and creating a collage of those can be a very powerful exercise to go through. And so anyway, if it's just, this topic's like way intriguing to you, you might enjoy that as you're starting to watch these themes and these things show up in your life. You may enjoy beginning to look for what would be a good picture that would represent that part of who I am, because we talked about this last time in Psalm 139, where, we read in there that God created our inmost parts and he intricately wove us. He saw our unformed substance before it was all put together. And so, many times when we're looking for identity and who am I and what is my purpose, a lot of times it's pieces and it's parts, and it's not just one statement. I think, excuse me, a long time ago, I think I thought that more of, well, when I find it, it'll be a statement. And we hear people talk about, having a vision statement and having a purpose statement. And I'm not going to knock those things because I think that they're very valuable. But I will tell you from experience and a ton of time, of my own time and working with people on these kinds of concepts, those statements are what you have at the very end, not at the very beginning of this journey. What you're going to find is it's going to start much more significantly as you just begin to notice the ingredients, the different little things, moments, people you're with, and they just begin to kind of cluster, and you have more and more of a sense of, wow, when I'm in environments with people like this, or when I'm doing these kinds of things, I really feel alive. Or when I'm, about this kind of work, I really feel alive. We talked last time about Eric Little, and when he ran, he said, I feel God's pleasure when I run. So it will, when we're in this journey, it's going to feel a lot more like random ingredients. And so, back to Psalm 139, you saw my parts, and it's going to first feel like that. It's just these kind of disconnected, maybe abstract different pieces. But then as we spend more time seeing those and noticing those, and we spend time with God about that, and we ask him to keep showing us, it'll get clearer and clearer and clearer. And sometimes we can get to the point where we do have a statement, a mission statement, a vision statement, a purpose statement. But that does take time. So don't be discouraged. This is a journey, and it's a fun journey. It's a meaningful journey. And I remember one time years ago having a mentor coach that said to me, if you learn like one thing every week, or you learn one thing every day, and you just keep doing that, like one thing after another thing after another thing, you're going to have a lot. You're going to know a lot. And I thought that was great advice. And the more I've walked with that, the more I've come to experientially know that is really good advice. And so even though this takes energy, it takes work, it's worth the journey. It's worth the noticing. And we're going to have a lot of life in the discovery, because that's part of what God has for us. So just want to encourage you. And like I said, sometimes a vision board can be a helpful intermediate step. So we start noticing, we log it, and then if we keep seeing one thing show up, we might even want to find a picture, or maybe we just distill that to like a word or two and we stick it somewhere, and then we end up with either a collage of pictures, or you've probably seen those things, I think they're called cloud quotes, where it's a bunch of random words that are all stuck together. But creating something like that can be a great thing that begins to make it clearer and clearer. And again, just something really practical, because we want this to be practical and useful. So today we're going to go in farther with identity and purpose, and we are going to focus more so on the purpose side. What is my purpose? How do I know what my purpose is? How do I discover my purpose? And we're going to spend some time looking at a few scriptures that are important for that. But before we do, I want to remind us, last time we looked at this idea from Tim Keller about identity, and he tells us in his book, Making Sense of God, he tells us that identity consists of two things. So it consists of a sense of self, who I am, and a sense of worth. So what is my value? What was I created for? And then he gives us this quote, which we'll put up here again: to have an identity is to have something sustained that is true of you in every setting. So we talked about that together last time, that we want to look for what's true of me no matter who I'm with, the settings that I'm in, the different environments over the course of life and different ages and seasons of life, what's true of me, because that helps to show identity. That helps us learn about that in my purpose. And then we also looked at, Psalm 139. So that idea of that you, God, you formed my inward parts and you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul. There it is again. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. And here's the part we're really diving into today. In your book were written, every one of them, the days. Think about that. It's not just years. It's not just decades. It's not just a life. The days that were formed for me when as yet there were none of them. Sometimes I think about that when I wake up in the morning and I think, God wrote today. He created today. He created today for me to live and to live with a purpose. He has something for me to be about today. I wonder what it is, and I just invite him in. Father, help me to know what you want me to be about today. Help me to recognize it and learn from you and walk with you today. So he created us for each and every day with a purpose. And with understanding purpose, we need to do something where we zoom to understand our individual purpose. We need to do something where we zoom like way out to understand the idea of overarching purpose, God's overarching purpose. So maybe I use a word picture here first for us. So imagine we're all on this like gigantic boat together. So let's say it's a cruise boat. And we're going somewhere. And let's say we happen to be people who work on that boat. And so we're on the boat, and then we each have our role or our job, or we could say our purpose. So maybe you're in the kitchen and you help cook and prepare amazing food, and you're a part of making those really pretty desserts. Or maybe you're someone who comes in and services rooms, and you create those really fun and cool towel animals that they create for us on cruise ships. Maybe you're somebody who works in the engine room and you keep that engine running, and wow, we're really thankful that you do, because there's not enough towel creatures or good food in the world to make up for us being stranded in the middle of the ocean. So we're really glad you're there, and we appreciate what you do. Or maybe you're someone who does the paperwork side and make sure that's taken care of. So there's lots of like individual purposes, individual roles when we're on a big boat like that, just a simple example. But there's also this like big picture overarching understanding of the purpose of the cruise. And what is the purpose? We take a lot of people on this boat with us. We're transporting them there with much comfort to some different destinations, hopefully for them to have an enjoyable trip. And then we're going to take them back, hopefully well and safely. And they've really felt great customer service. And then we're going to do it again. And so there's this overarching purpose. Well, with that, we can know, because of the overarching purpose, that's going to guide my individual purpose. So yes, maybe I'm the mechanic, and maybe you're the one in the kitchen making the amazing desserts, and they're all beautiful and fancy. But I know, and as we do our individual purposes, we're doing that in line with and for the overarching purpose of having these people on this boat have an incredible time and experience a great customer service experience while they're traveling, and hopefully they're enjoying themselves. So overarching purpose is there, and then helps us understand individual purpose. Now, if I'm on a boat like that, so I'm just going to use a goofy example because sometimes they make a lot of sense. Let's say I'm on a boat like that, and let's say what I do is I actually pave highways. Okay. Glad you pave highways, but we don't need you to bring a bunch of asphalt and your equipment to pave a highway on this boat. Like, that does not serve the overarching purpose. Great thing, good thing, wrong place. So why do I bring up these kind of silly examples and metaphors? When we want to know what our purpose is, we need to know what are the overarching purposes of God? What are the overarching purposes of the world and what he's about? You know, today, we don't hear a lot about this. I wish we heard more about it. We don't hear a lot about this, the idea of the overarching purposes of God, his plans for history, you know, what he's about, why we're all here, the overarching reason. It's not talked about a lot. And yet it matters, because what happens in the absence of that is we can just sort of come to not think of it, and it just becomes this foggy thing, and then sort of just an unknown thing we never think about. And that is that we actually have an individual purpose within the overarching purpose. We have one. And when I don't know that, when I don't know the overarching purpose, I can begin to think that my purpose is a standalone purpose. It doesn't have any connection to other people or to God. And I mean, if the whole world lives like that, imagine how many gigantic human collisions we're bound for, because we all have come to sort of this belief that there is no overarching purpose. There is no point and no reason. And we know there's a lot of people that feel that way. We know there's a lot of people that think that way. And that, of course, creates hopelessness. It creates a lot of conflict in the world and issues and problems. And we can live like that. You know, we've talked about the heart and the will. We can live like that. We get to choose that. But if we really want to know identity, who am I? Purpose, what was I made for? What's my calling? What's going to create in me abundant life and life to the full? Then I want to know my identity. Who am I? My purpose. What was I created for? And in order to really understand that, I need to understand what are the overarching purposes of God. So I'm going to walk us through 5 or 6 verses here. We're going to move quickly, and I just want to encourage you, stay plugged in. I know this can incline us to go, oh, my 4 or 5. That's a lot of scriptures. Try to stay plugged in here, because there's a theme and we need to know it. Otherwise, we sort of end up fictitiously as the road paving person on the cruise ship, and then there's no way we're going to really discover purpose, because we're not in alignment with the overarching purposes. So I'm going to walk through some scriptures that help us understand what is the overarching purposes that God has for all of us, and then we understand individual purpose. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of the Bible, and we see this in Genesis 1. So the very first chapter of the Bible, very first book of the Bible. Here is God, and we see this, and it says, then God said, he's going to talk. He said, let us make man, or mankind, in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. So notice that word, let them. So here's overarching purpose. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps along the earth. Now, just a couple verses later, we also read this, and it says, and God blessed them, mankind, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and listen to this, and subdue it. Have dominion. There's our word again. Have dominion, have rule, have reign, have dominion over the sea, the fish in the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and every living thing that moves on the earth. Then we're going to move forward a little bit farther. So the earth has been created, and then there's a lot of things that start happening that aren't good, and there's a lot of evil on the earth. And so we get to in the latter part of the book, or I guess not really latter part, it's the 9th chapter, so a number of chapters later, a lot of years in between this, but a number of chapters later, we get to this story where there's actually a flood, and everybody on the earth passes away in this flood, except for a man by the name of Noah and his family. So many of you probably know the story of Noah and the ark. So Noah and his family get on this boat, and after the flood, everybody is gone. Like, finally the boat comes back to earth. The whole earth floods. And then finally the boat comes back, and they get off of the boat, and this is what God says to them. So it's like this gigantic, it's a sad thing, but it's also this gigantic restart, that's happening in history. And God says this to Noah, and it says in Genesis 9:1, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. How interesting. The plan of God, the strategy of God. Here it continues. Now we're going to jump a number of books farther forward in the Old Testament to the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, we see Daniel 7:27, it says, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, all the kingdoms of the earth under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Who is that? People who are the children of God, people who walk with God. All of the kingdoms are going to be given to the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions, ooh, there's that word again, dominions, reign, rule, kingdoms, all the dominions shall serve and obey him, God. All of them are going to end up obeying him. Then we're going to jump now to the New Testament. So here we see this theme. Here's the people. We're created in the image of God. We're created to subdue the earth, to have dominion over the earth, to reign over the earth. It's very clear through the Old Testament. I'm just literally skimming like way tippy top peaks in the Old Testament to pull that together. So now we're going to jump into the New Testament. What do we see? Do we see that theme continue, that overarching purpose? And we see, here we go, Matthew, and this is Matthew 28:19 through 20. And this is after Jesus has been on the earth. So he's been here. He's performed amazing miracles. He is the most impactful person in all of history. AD, BC, all of that hinges upon Jesus being in the middle. It's like this, he's so impactful, God in the flesh. And so now he's leaving after all these years, being with the disciples and being on this earth. And this is what he says to them. Some of the last words. Think about how important last words are. So important. So he says to them, after all of what he's just walked through on our behalf, he says, go therefore and make disciples, listen to this, of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe. Okay, that's that idea of dominion again, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always. Somebody needs to hear that today. I am with you always, to the end of the age. So here's the idea in the New Testament. God created us, made in his image, and he wants us to be out there among all of the nations, so in the world, having dominion, teaching people how to walk their life in the things that Jesus showed us and he taught us, to have dominion, to have reign, to have rule, to show them, how do I live in alignment with the bigger kingdom, the kingdom of God? Now, a couple more verses and then we'll in kind of covering these verses. So later in the New Testament, we get to the book of Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:12, and this is just the first half of that verse. And we see Paul, in this case, talking, and he says, if we endure, so we're going to go through hard times. He says, if we endure, we will also reign. Here's that word again. We will reign with him. And then last verse that we're covering now, we get to the very, very end. Okay, so we've gone from the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1. Now we're in the very last book of the Bible, Revelation, and we see Revelation 3:21. And here's what it says. The one who conquers, so overcomes the hard things, the one who conquers, I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne. Dominion, reigning with God. I will grant him to sit with me on my throne as I have conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. So, what do you think the overarching purposes of God are? And what do you think the overarching purposes are for God with us? God created the world. God created us to be like him. He wants us to create good things in this world. He wants us to reign, to have dominion in this world, making it a place of goodness, of life, of abundant life. He created that for us to be about that on this earth, so all of the time that mankind is on this earth. And he created us then after we have passed and we are now in eternity, no longer on this earth, that we would reign with him, that we would continue to be about creating goodness like he does around us throughout all of eternity. That is the overarching purposes of God. And just a side note here, if you really want to know your purpose, if you want to know identity, like I said last time, you need to ask God. He made you. And sometimes people, talk about history being his story. So you want to know God, and you also want to know his word. And I hear a lot of people say, but I read the Bible and I don't really understand. Okay, well, we're going to keep talking about that on this podcast to help you understand. But I will tell you this with all sincerity, you will not know your purposes if you don't know the overarching purposes of God. And it's going to be very hard for you to know that if you don't listen to what he says. So imagine if I was trying to tell you, hey, use this thing. These are the purposes. If you had no idea what the screwdriver was used for at all, like had no clue, and then I'm trying to tell you, but I can't use words, or maybe I can use words, but you don't listen, you don't want to hear them, you don't know, then it's going to be very hard for you to figure out the purpose. And we need to know the Bible. We need to know the words. This is God talking. We need to know what he says if we really want to know what our purpose is. And so I just want to encourage you, even if you don't understand it all, even if it doesn't all make sense, keep track of what doesn't make sense to you. Ask God, and he will provide someone to help explain that to you. I guarantee that. I guarantee that will happen. So if you really want to know, tell God, I want to know and I want to understand. Keep track of what you don't know and don't understand. And then look for him to bring someone into your life that can help you understand and unpack the things that you don't, that are in the Bible, because there are a lot of people out there who could do that and want to do that for you. But keep track of that, but just take it in, even if you don't get it all, even if it doesn't make sense to you, because you need that to really understand your overarching purpose. Okay? So we see this overarching purpose of God. So he has told us, here is what he's about. Here is what we're all to be about. And so if we boil that down to, and Jesus says this in the New Testament, we can understand that to be something like this. And this is a verse we've already looked at quite a bit. So this is Mark 12, 30 through 31. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, mission statement of mission statements right there. Now, Jesus was the best teacher of all. He created everything. We understand that. He made it all. So he's very good at putting things into one sentence or a few words. And he's boiling it down for us. He's saying, here is what everybody is going to need to generally be about. Loving God with all of your heart. Here's our slide. All of your soul, all of your mind, all of your strength, your body, what you do, and love your neighbor, love other people as yourself. So reign, be about the goodness of God and helping other people. So we can see overarching purposes. Our individual purpose is not going to be contrary to the overarching purposes of God. He wants us to love him, to be like him, and to love other people, to make the world better, to help. And it's our individual purpose will never be contrary to that. That's what's going to help us know and understand our overarching purposes. So when we're looking for that, when we're discovering that, we want to hold that in our mind, the overarching purposes of God. And we want to especially note that when I put myself in settings, or I'm in settings and I look for how to love God and extend the goodness of God in that setting on behalf of me and him and the people, loving people, that is I almost think of it like an alignment, or maybe we use like a cell phone idea. This thing is worthless if there's no signal. I have to get into a space where there's signal. But if I'm in that space, then all of a sudden it makes sense. And that's true for our purpose. We need to sometimes put ourselves in a setting where we either are now about that, or we're in a setting and we put our mindset and our heart, our will into that mode and say, God, what do you care about? What are you about? How do I love you? How do I love these people? And that will majorly, I think of it like a knob, turn it way up. That is majorly going to help us begin to have a ton more experiences where we feel, like we talked about last time, we start feeling more alive. We start feeling satisfaction. We start feeling aliveness and that glow and that passion and that sense of like, oh my goodness, this is what I was made for. And so if we don't pick up on a lot of that, we need to sometimes ask ourselves, am I maybe working against the purposes, the overarching purposes of God? Am I trying to make this about me? Am I trying to make this about my stuff and my kingdom and my little world for my sake? Am I treating other people? Maybe a better way of saying is, am I using them to make me happy and get what I want so I can have what I want? If the answer is yes, yes, and yes to those kinds of things, then we need to realize I'm probably not going to have a sense of fulfillment. I'm not going to have a sense of being about what God has created for me to be about. I'm not going to feel fully alive. I'm not going to have abundant life. There's just no way, because I'm working against the purposes of God. I'm the person on the cruise ship that is paving a highway on the cruise ship, which nobody wants or needs, and it's working against the goal and the purposes. It's creating a terrible smell. The passengers are miserable. It's adding weight. It's like, this is not helping. I'm that person. If I am about just me, just my purposes. And it's wild in the Bible, because God promises to us that as we lay down our life, we're going to find it. What does that mean? As I love God, I put God first. I will God's desires and his best. As I love God and as I love other people, what does that mean? Dallas Willard says to will their good. Love is to will someone's good. As I love them, as I will their good, well, I'm putting them ahead of me. I'm letting what I want maybe be lower, and I'm putting them, God and them, above. And he promises us that's where we're going to have life. As you lay down your life, you will find it. And I can attest to the fact that that is so true. That is so true, because all of a sudden now we've aligned ourselves with a very powerful thing. We have aligned ourselves with the overarching purposes of God, and we're going to feel it just come through. And as we do, you will have more life than you know what to do with. You will have it. You will feel abundant life, because now you're aligned with the God's purposes, the overarching purposes of God, helping other people, loving God, extending his desire for good across the world. And it's, we don't want to over spiritualize it. You don't have to be in full-time ministry. You don't always have to be within the walls of a church building. We talked last time about Eric Liddell. He felt that when he was running and he was doing it. He felt the pleasure of God when he was running. You might be an accountant, and you're going to feel that when you're organizing and you're making your numbers add up to accuracy. What are you doing? You're subduing the earth. You're having dominion. You're making it better for his purposes, good things, and for the sake of other people. You might be an accountant. You might truly be a cook. You might be a mom. That's a really, really important job. You're raising the next generation. And sometimes we can think, oh my goodness, like I'm cleaning up toys and wiping up ketchup off the floor. And no, you're doing that, but you're having dominion. You're extending the goodness of God. You're loving somebody. You're loving them. And that's when we are going to start sensing our individual purpose. It can take all kinds of variations, all kinds of different applications, but it has to align with the overarching rule of God, or we will never find it life to the full. It just won't happen. So how do we do that this week? How do we make that practical? Consider how much of your life is really aligned with the overarching purposes of God. Just begin to take track of that and notice it, and think about that gas gauge idea, the soul, and it picking up on more life or empty and drained. And you might want to start, as you watch that, start noticing, when I'm feeling more empty and drained, how much of that was actually because it was about me and just what I want, and what I want at the expense of what other people want, or maybe what I want above maybe the goodness and extension of the dominion and the rule of the goodness of God. You want to start noticing that, and then start noticing that, whoa, even sometimes when I'm sacrificing, when I'm putting somebody ahead of me, when I'm letting them talk more than me, something so simple like that. Wow, I do feel more alive. I do feel more satisfied. I do feel more life to the full. That's what we're after anyway. So, okay, they talk more than you, but you might feel most alive, and that's part of what we want, is that life to the full. So just notice that this week, that fulfilled, empty, less fulfilled, and notice how that is in alignment or not in alignment with the overarching purposes of God. And consider, maybe, second piece of this, how could you potentially put yourself in more of that kind of a setting, or that kind of a mindset in current settings, so that you can begin to understand and experience you're in the alignment, then you're in the right setting to then begin to really have more experiences that make you know, wow, yeah, this I think is my purpose. Now you're in the setting because you're aligned with that overarching purposes of God. You're going to have a lot more of those experiences. You're going to get there a lot faster. So invite the Holy Spirit to help you as you wonder about and you notice, am I aligned with the things of God's overarching purposes? And as you also consider, maybe, how do I get in that kind of a mindset in my current life circumstances and settings? Or maybe how do I put myself in more of that place where I'm actually just about that? Do I volunteer? Do I Do I maybe become a part of something that just would put me in that overarching realm that would then allow me to try a bunch of different things and begin to discover, yeah, what is my purpose, my specific purpose? Where's my place on that boat? If we go back to that metaphor. So have a great week. We'll pick back up next time, and can't wait to keep exploring. Blessings to you, and look forward to talking to you then.